Tom, who's a history teacher in St. Louis, writes, as the United States is currently commemorating the sesquicentennial of the Civil War, how do you address those who argue that slavery was, at best, a minor cause of the war and that states' rights was the one true cause?
Well, as you say, I think we've addressed this in part. Let me just add this, that during, I think it's 1864, when 1864, 1865, when another subject comes up, when the Confederacy is facing the very real possibility of collapsing, and when the subject of my last book then is posed. Confederacy begins to consider whether to arm at the cost of emancipating at least some of its slaves. And there is a tremendous uproar when Jefferson Davis himself begins to endorse this idea in November of 1864. And his opponents basically say, what did we go to war for, if not to preserve slavery? Then Davis's advocates say, no, 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 we didn't go to war to preserve slavery, even though Davis himself has said they did in 1861. They say, no, we went to war for the sake of states' rights. And the reply that is contained in many letters to the editor in Southern newspapers and Southern editorials basically boils down to, who do you think you're kidding? The whole purpose of states' rights has been to protect slavery from the federal government. What's the point of protecting states' rights if you give away what they were supposed to protect? And one writer says, states' rights is nothing but the armor around that we placed around slavery to protect it. And I think that puts it very well.
Yeah, absolutely. And that secession may have been about states' rights, but the states' rights
to, as one slave owner put it, to protect the God-given right to own an African.
Yeah. I want to bring out, we only have a few minutes left, and I want to get this, but we're starting to get to the point of the conversation. We're talking about the fall. We've built it up, and so I want to look at another really interesting artifact that we have. Now I'm going to tell a little bit, going to take a minute, because I wanted to describe this a little bit. Now this is an abolitionist broadside. It's a triumphal broadside that would have been printed and posted on walls in the Northeast, especially in Washington, D.C., in April of 1865. John B. Rogers created it in Philadelphia. It reads, I'm going to read it to the folks here, the folks at home can see it. It's a death certificate. And it reads, died near the South Side Railroad on Sunday, April 9, 1865. The Southern Confederacy, aged 4 years, conceived in sin, born in iniquity, nurtured by tyranny, died of a chronic attack of punch. Abraham Lincoln, attending physician, U.S. Grant, undertaker, Jeff Davis, chief mourner. Now let's admit right up front, this is a triumphal broadside. I showed this to an author that came in with a book about Douglas Southall Freeman. Now I feel embarrassed. I can't remember his name. Fine book about Douglas Southall Freeman, and he said, "Yeah, that's like waving a red cape at a Southerner at a
bull.
At a bull. Yeah, that is definitely. But let's think for a second about the context of it. It is April 1865. It's then, not now, in the immediate aftermath of the war. And they make a joke. They make a joke about Abraham Lincoln being the attending physician. Let's take an inference there. Would they have made this broadside after Abraham Lincoln was murdered? The answer is probably no, which dates the creation of this broadside to within about a week after Appomattox, before the assassination. And they're very uncommon, so obviously they were taken down and they were thrown away, which makes them very valuable. And if you want to buy it, please let us know. But Bruce, can you comment on this? What does the House of Dixie look like now in April 1865 when Northerners are mocking the failure of the war and the surrender.
Well, Bjorn, I think we need to be careful about how far we take a piece of literature like this and presume that it represents the views of Northerners in general. It's certainly not Lincoln's view himself. Lincoln would never have endorsed this sort of jeering at the South, and certainly not something Grant would have done. Grant, at the point of Lee's surrender, is famously extremely courteous, and he and the soldiers with him make a point of saluting the defeated members of Lee's army and showing respect for what Grant says in his memoirs was a tremendously effective and courageous struggle, albeit, in Grant's opinion, a struggle on behalf of one of the worst causes ever fought for. But there, I think, were many, many more Northerners who were simply relieved that the war was over, who had, as angry as they had become with the leaders and soldiers of the Confederacy during the war, were anxious to patch up the wounds of the war, rather than exacerbate them with this sort of triumphal celebration. There was great pleasure that the war was over, of course, that the Union had been preserved, that slavery was on the verge of destruction, but that was not the same thing, I think, as the sentiment, understandable, I think, as it is. It's not the same thing as this sort of public mockery that is embodied in this document, and that I think did not express the general attitude of Northern whites.
Right. There's certainly relief, almost like the Charleston document.
Exactly.
It's an outpouring of relief, but even the guy who created it might not have stood by it a year later, or even a few
Very
weeks
likely.
later, after the change, after the death of the president. There's so much more we could talk about. We're running out of time, and I want to talk about a number of things that we're not going to get to, and we're not going to talk about the Emancipation Proclamation. We're now in the 150th anniversary of the month of the Emancipation Proclamation, but that's in here.
Oh, it sure is.
You need to buy the book to see that. We're not really, we talked a little bit about slavery and the end of slavery. We did not talk about the crucial role of the soldiers of the Department of the United States Colored Troops. And to some extent you talk about them in contradiction with the free regiments, 54th Massachusetts, 50th, sometimes you say that, but the 180,000 Southerners,
Right.
180,000 Southerners of African descent who became part of the U.S. Army and fought against slavery. And we didn't talk about the hundreds of thousands of white Southerners
Quite right.
from southern states like Missouri and Kentucky and Tennessee.
But even Confederate states. There
And
were many Southern white soldiers in the Union Army who hailed from Confederate states, which helps to put the lie to the idea, of course, that the South really was united. And when people commonly say today, why are you criticizing the South in books like this? My answer is always, why do you choose to identify as a Southerner with the Confederacy when there were at the time all sorts of other Southerners whom you might look back and claim as your antecedents, such as Southern supporters of the Union, white and black?
Yeah. So these are all things that you're going to see when you have a chance to buy the book. You need to cover these topics. But my last question for you is going to be about your job, not about your book, and because it does relate to us, and it's Abraham Lincoln Bookshop, and it may be comically broad, so answer it as quickly as short as you. But you hold the J.G. Randall Professorship at the University of Illinois. James G. Randall. James G. Randall was in his day the Dean of Lincoln Studies. That's not a job you can apply for and get. That's just popularly he was known as the Dean of Lincoln Studies. One of the great Lincoln scholars of the mid 20th century, and we recommend his books highly, and you can buy them from us. But Professor Randall famously said about 1950, I didn't look it up, but a speech called "Has the Lincoln Theme Been Exhausted?" He's very famous for having made that speech. He answered the question himself in the speech, and the answer was no. Let's keep writing about Lincoln. But now it's 2012, and you hold the J.G. Randall professorship. So I'll ask you, in 2012, has the Lincoln theme been exhausted?
Yes, which is why I'm basically resigning my position at the university and closing it down. Because aren't we all tired of this by now? I don't think this question has been exhausted. I think the Civil War richly deserves the name the Second American Revolution. In my opinion, it was the event that more importantly transformed the nature of the country than any other, perhaps barring the war that gave birth to the country in the first place. This is the beginning of something, of a brand new epoch, and raised series of questions in military and social form that we are still grappling with today. The question of equal rights, equal access to opportunity, equal treatment are still among the most important questions facing us in the modern era. And the story of the Civil War and understanding how we got from there to here is still crucial. And it is striking how many people, including those who are enrolled in universities, are unfamiliar not only with the story of the war, but the story of the war's aftermath. And I think education in those subjects and more writing about those subjects is of inestimable value to us today.
And certainly James and Ruth Randall, fine historians both, lived in a different time period. And even if you write about the past, your personal experience in some way informs your point of view. And now we have an entire generation, more than a generation, since Randall, who've grown up since the writings of Randall and have other secondary sources, and, at least in the case of the Lincoln Legal Project, an enormous cache of primary sources that have never been used.
Quite right. So I think one of the big jobs is taking some of this material, as much of this material as possible, and making it as available and as accessible as possible to as large a portion of the population as we can. That work continues.
Yeah. Bruce Levine, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you very much.
The book is The Fall of the House of Dixie, The Civil War and the Social Revolution That Transformed the South, published by Random House, and we thank them for sending Bruce to us. The price is $30. We are going to have, if you've missed this program live and you're watching it on the archive, we are going to have signed first edition copies that we're going to keep here available to you. Call us, write us, email us. We'll have the book. We'll sell it to you. And thank you to Random House. Thank you to Bruce. Thank you to all of you who came here to visit us today. And you're going to get your chances to talk to Bruce now when we stop the broadcast. Join us next week for when David Vondrelli is here with Rise to Greatness, Abraham Lincoln and America's Most Perilous Year. That'll be next Saturday at noon, right back here. I'll send you an email. You all get emails from us. And then 1 month from today, I don't know why I'm shifting through my papers to find it. Not 1 month from today, on February 15th, next month. Virtual book signing next month will feature, since we're talking about the movie, Tony Kushner, the author of the screenplay of Steven Spielberg's Lincoln. He'll be here with Harold Holzer on Friday, February 15th. At noon, he'll be at the Union League Club for a luncheon. And then in the afternoon, he will be here for virtual book signing. So thank you very much for joining us on virtual book signing, and we will see you next week.